There is one truth that most people spend their lives trying to escape. The moment you no longer depend on anyone to feel whole, you finally begin to live. From the moment we're born, the world teaches us to look outward, to seek happiness in affection, approval, and success. We measure our worth by who stays, who notices, who loves us. But the Buddha reminded us that when your peace depends on something or someone outside you, that peace can vanish as easily as a passing breeze. The more you chase validation, the farther you drift from yourself. Because if you haven't made peace with your own silence, you will mistake every quiet moment for loneliness. This isn't about escaping the world. It's about coming home to yourself. We'll explore the timeless wisdom that shows how solitude isn't emptiness, but the space where the spirit breathes. You'll see how emotional independence is the birth of real love, how awareness cuts through illusion, and how the quiet you once feared becomes the ground of freedom. Life doesn't begin when the right people arrive. It begins when you finally meet yourself in stillness. So take a deep breath. Let go of everything you think you need, and walk with me on the journey to discover the freedom from attachment. In a world obsessed with independence, we often mistake rebellion for freedom. We break away from traditions, from rules, from authority, and yet we still feel bound. Because real freedom is not about doing whatever we want. It's about not being enslaved by what we feel. The Buddha once said, "If you are controlled by your desires, you are not free." And nowhere is this more true than in our relationships, where love often becomes another form of attachment. We long for freedom, but we cling to the very things that keep us tied. That's why Buddhism calls inner independence the only true freedom. Most people think love is about merging, about becoming one with another. But in that merging, something is quietly lost, the space to just be. We start to breathe through another person. Their moods shape our peace. Their approval becomes our oxygen. And when they leave, we feel like we can't exist without them. This is not love. This is dependence wearing love's mask. The Buddha described this as upadana, clinging, grasping. It's the mind saying, "I need this person to feel complete." But the truth is, you don't need anyone to be whole. Wholeness is your nature. It's not something to be achieved, it's something to be remembered. When you mistake dependence for love, your peace becomes fragile, because anything external can be taken away at any time. But when love arises from inner independence, your peace becomes unshakable, because it comes from the one thing that can never be taken from you, your own awareness.
Buddhism doesn't reject love, it refines it. It asks, can you love without clinging? Can you care without control? Can you give without expecting? This is the essence of emotional maturity, the realization that love is something you share, not something you possess. The Buddha taught that attachment leads to suffering Because it is rooted in fear, fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of being alone. When love is guided by fear, it becomes conditional. But when it flows from inner freedom, it becomes unconditional. You love because it is your nature to love, not because someone completes you. This is why the Buddha often compared the enlightened mind to a lotus. It grows in muddy water, but remains untouched by it. Similarly, you can move through relationships, through joy and heartbreak alike, while remaining rooted in peace. Think of how often we depend on others for validation. A compliment makes us glow. Criticism makes us crumble. We live like leaves blown by the winds of approval and disapproval. Validation from others is like sugar. It feels good for a moment, but it doesn't nourish you. Inner freedom, on the other hand, is like still water, quiet, deep, sustaining. It doesn't depend on anyone noticing you. It comes from knowing yourself. When you no longer seek validation, you begin to act from truth instead of insecurity. Your words become softer, your relationships lighter, your presence more powerful, because you are no longer performing for approval. So how do we cultivate this freedom? The first step is awareness, seeing your own patterns. Notice how your peace rises and falls based on another person's behavior. Notice the moments you seek comfort through attention or reassurance. Don't judge these impulses, simply observe them. Awareness itself is liberating, because what you can observe, you no longer have to obey. Next, return to yourself through solitude, through silence, through stillness. When you sit alone and allow the discomfort to surface, you begin to see what lies underneath it, the fear of being unworthy, unseen, unloved. But the Buddha's wisdom cuts through that illusion. Your worth doesn't come from others seeing you, it comes from you seeing clearly. Finally, practice metta, loving kindness, not only toward others, but toward yourself. Wish yourself freedom from fear, peace in solitude, joy without dependence. Each moment you love without needing, you strengthen your independence. Each time you accept yourself without validation, you expand your freedom. When you achieve inner independence, relationships no longer feel heavy. You don't cling to expectations. You don't demand constant reassurance. You give love freely, and if it returns, it's a gift, not a necessity. This doesn't make you cold or detached. It makes you clear. You love with presence, not possession. You share joy, but you no longer confuse it with survival. Buddhism calls this upekkha, equanimity. It's the ability to remain balanced in both joy and sorrow, gain and loss, praise and blame. It's not indifference, it's peace with whatever is. When you stand in this space, you no longer fear losing anyone because you found yourself. And once you found that, you can walk into love not as a beggar, but as a giver. This is the essence of freedom, the freedom to love without chains.
There's a strange irony in our modern world. We are more connected than ever before, yet more people feel lonely than at any time in history. We fear silence. We fear pauses. We fear sitting with ourselves. We fill our hours with noise, scrolling, chatting, working, anything to avoid that quiet space where we might meet the one person we spend our whole life with, ourselves. But in the teachings of the Buddha, loneliness is not a curse. It is an invitation, a subtle call from life itself, whispering, "Come back home." From a young age, we're taught to avoid loneliness. We're told that being alone means being unloved, unwanted, incomplete. And so when solitude comes knocking, we run. We seek distraction, company, validation. But the more we run, the louder the silence becomes. Because what we're really running from is not the absence of others, it's the presence of ourselves. The Buddha often spoke of dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness of life. And one of its roots is craving. Craving for pleasant company, pleasant feelings, pleasant outcomes. When we crave constant connection, we reject the natural rhythm of life, which alternates between togetherness and solitude. To resist one half of existence is to reject the wholeness of it. In Buddhist thought, everything is impermanent, anicca. Relationships, emotions, even our sense of identity, all in constant motion. Loneliness, too, is impermanent. It arises when the mind labels the present moment as incomplete. But in reality, the moment is never incomplete. Only our perception of it is. The Buddha did not encourage isolation, but he did speak of noble solitude. He said, if one finds no companion who is equal or better, let them walk alone, like a king who leaves his conquered kingdom behind. This is not arrogance. It is wisdom. It means do not fear your own company. Walk with yourself as you would with a trusted friend. When you sit in solitude, without reaching for your phone or your past or your fantasies, something beautiful happens. The mind begins to settle, like muddy water left undisturbed. And in that stillness, you begin to see clearly, not the world outside, but the world within.
What makes loneliness painful is not solitude itself, it's our resistance to it. The mind says, this shouldn't be happening, I should be with someone, I should be doing something. That should is the source of suffering. It's like swimming against the current of a river that's simply trying to carry you home. When we stop fighting our aloneness, we begin to notice its texture, its quiet, its depth, its honesty. It's not hostile, it's patient. It waits for us to stop running. Meditation is essentially the art of befriending solitude. You sit, you breathe, you meet yourself again and again. At first it feels uncomfortable, like meeting a stranger. But slowly the stranger becomes familiar. You realize this awareness has always been with you, watching, listening, waiting. You were never truly alone. There's a phrase in Zen, the temple without walls. It means that sacredness doesn't only exist in monasteries or shrines. It exists in any space where awareness is alive. When you sit quietly, even your small room becomes a temple. The sound of your breath, the hum of distant life, the light falling through the window, all of it becomes part of the same vast silence. That silence is not empty. It's full of presence, full of being. The Buddha's life itself was shaped by solitude. Before his awakening, he left his palace, his wealth, his family, and wandered the forests of India. He meditated under the Bodhi tree, utterly alone, And yet, in that aloneness, he touched the truth of all beings. So when you feel lonely, remember, you're not being punished. You're being invited into the same silence where sages have found peace for thousands of years. Something magical happens when you stop resisting solitude. The sharp edges of loneliness begin to soften. You start to notice that the very thing you feared becomes your refuge. The emptiness you once ran from becomes a vast open sky where your thoughts can breathe. The silence you once called unbearable becomes the most honest companion you've ever known. And slowly, what felt like isolation transforms into clarity. Buddhism teaches that everything contains its opposite. Suffering contains liberation. Loneliness contains connection. Because when you understand yourself deeply, you realize that the boundaries between you and others were never as solid as you thought. In moments of stillness, the illusion of separation dissolves. You sense the life that flows through everything, the same life that breathes through you. And in that recognition, loneliness vanishes, not because you found someone else, but because you remembered that you were never apart from life itself.
In the modern world, the word detachment is often misunderstood. People hear it and imagine coldness, a kind of emotional withdrawal, a refusal to care. But in the language of Buddhism, detachment doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you stop suffering over love. It means you love without losing yourself. You care deeply, but you don't cling. You can hold someone close in your heart, but your peace doesn't depend on whether they stay or go. The Buddha called this upekkha, equanimity, a love so vast and wise that it cannot be shaken by the tides of life. We fear detachment because we believe love must involve attachment. We think, if I don't hold tightly, I might lose them. But what if love was never meant to be a chain? The Buddha saw that attachment always carries suffering, dukkha, because everything we hold on to is impermanent. People change, circumstances change, even emotions change. To tie your happiness to something that changes is to build your house on the sea. Detachment is not a rejection of love. It's love purified of fear. It's the freedom to love someone without turning them into your anchor. It's the understanding that you can walk beside someone without trying to control their path. When we love, our minds often whisper, "Don't lose this." We cling because we fear emptiness. We fear that without the other, we'll vanish into loneliness. But Buddhism teaches that emptiness is not nothingness. It's spaciousness. It's the space in which love can breathe freely. When you cling, you choke the very thing you're trying to protect. When you let go, love becomes alive again, dynamic, effortless, and kind. Attachment says, "I need you to make me happy." Detachment says, "I'm already whole, and I choose to share that wholeness with you." The Buddha compared this to holding a flower. If you grip it too tightly, it withers. If you hold it gently, it thrives. That gentleness, that open palm, is detachment. In Buddhist thought, love, Metta is not a transaction. It's not based on how much you receive, but on how purely you give. When love is pure, it doesn't bind you or the other person. It liberates both. True love doesn't say, "You belong to me." It says, "I see you as you are, free, changing, alive, and I love you in that truth." When you love like this, you stop trying to freeze moments in time. You stop demanding that others remain who they were yesterday. You begin to appreciate the ever-changing nature of life itself. And in that acceptance, love deepens, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. How do we live this teaching? How do we love without attachment in a world that romanticizes possession? The first step is awareness. See the ways you try to control, subtle or obvious. Notice when your love becomes a bargain. If you act this way, I'll feel safe. When you catch yourself clinging, pause, breathe, return to the present moment. Ask yourself, can I love this person as they are, even if they never change? If the answer is yes, you're touching the essence of detachment. Next, cultivate solitude. Spend time with yourself without distractions. Learn to enjoy your own presence, to sit with your own mind. The Buddha often retreated into forests, not to escape people, but to understand himself. Only when you are comfortable in your own company can you love others without fear of being alone. Finally, practice compassion, not just for others, but for yourself. Let go of guilt for wanting peace. Let go of the belief that letting go is betrayal. You're not abandoning love, you're allowing it to flow freely.
When you understand detachment, your relationships transform. You no longer need constant reassurance. You no longer feel threatened by distance or change. You love because it's your nature to love, not because you're trying to fill a void. This love has no agenda. It asks for nothing in return. And because of that, it becomes infinite. The Buddha said, "As a mother protects her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings." Boundless, not possessive, not fearful. That is the love of the awakened heart. You can care deeply, but when the time comes to let go, you do so with grace, because you understand that nothing truly beautiful can be owned. It can only be appreciated while it's here. Detachment is not the death of love. It is the rebirth of love in its purest form. It's the moment when you realize that your happiness doesn't depend on anyone's presence or approval. It's the calm strength of knowing that love flows through you, not to you. So, the next time life asks you to let go of a person, of a phase, of a feeling, remember, you're not losing love. You're simply returning it to its natural state, vast, peaceful, and free. The Buddha once said, "In the end, only 3 things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go." So, breathe deeply. Let your heart soften. love without holding, and you'll discover detachment is not separation. It's union through freedom. The illusion of need is a creation of the mind. Most of the suffering we experience in life doesn't come from the world itself. It comes from the mind's reaction to it. The Buddha once compared the mind to a restless monkey, leaping from thought to thought, chasing one desire after another, always reaching, never resting. The mind says, I need this person. I need that success. I need to be seen, to be loved, to be enough. And in that very sentence, I need, suffering is born. But there is something within you that is older than the mind, something vast, silent, and free. That is awareness, the pure seeing that exists before thought, before craving, before identity. When awareness awakens, the illusion of need begins to dissolve. You stop chasing completeness in the world because you realize you were never incomplete to begin with. The Buddha described the untrained mind as a monkey bitten by a scorpion, drunk on liquor, and haunted by ghosts. It's a mind constantly in motion, restless, unsatisfied, always searching for something to fix or grasp. The mind invents problems that don't exist. It tells you stories like, "You're not enough. You'll be happy only when you achieve this. You need them to love you, or you'll be alone forever." And you believe it, because the voice sounds like yours. But the Buddha taught you that you are not the voice. You are the awareness that hears it. When you believe the mind's stories, you live in a cage made of thoughts. When you see the stories for what they are, the bars begin to melt away. That's the power of awareness. It doesn't fight the mind. It simply sees through it. The mind survives through dissatisfaction. If you were completely content, the mind would have no reason to keep thinking. So it keeps whispering, something's missing. It projects happiness into the future. When I have this job, I'll be happy. When they love me back, I'll feel complete. When my life looks like theirs, I'll finally rest. But every time you reach one goal, the mind moves the finish line a little further. That's why craving is endless. It feeds itself. Buddhism calls this cycle tanha, thirst. And as long as thirst rules the mind, peace remains out of reach. Awareness, on the other hand, doesn't chase. It doesn't need the future to be different from now. It simply sees, clearly, without judgment. And in that seeing, the illusion of lack begins to fade.
How awareness destroys the need. Awareness is like light. It doesn't fight darkness. It simply reveals that the darkness was never real. When you become aware of your thoughts, you begin to see them as clouds passing through the vast sky of your consciousness. They come and go, but they don't define the sky. A thought arises, "I'm lonely." Awareness sees it gently, and in that moment of seeing, something changes. The thought loses its grip. The storm begins to quiet. Because awareness doesn't add another story. It doesn't say, "I shouldn't feel this way." It simply observes. And that simple act of seeing without resistance dissolves the illusion of need. This is why meditation is not about emptying the mind. It's about watching it with clarity. When you watch the mind, you start to understand it. And when you understand it, you're no longer its prisoner. Imagine a still lake on a windless morning. When the surface is calm, it perfectly reflects the sky. That lake is your awareness. The ripples are your thoughts, stories, fears, needs, cravings. When you rest in awareness, the surface settles, and you begin to see reality clearly. You realize that happiness was never in the things you chased. It was hidden behind the chase itself. The Buddha called this Santuti, contentment, the joy of enough. It's not the joy of having everything, it's the joy of needing nothing. When you rest in this space, you stop trying to complete yourself through people, possessions, or praise. You no longer confuse stimulation with satisfaction. You begin to live not as a seeker, but as one who has already arrived.
How do we bring this awareness into our daily lives? It begins with noticing. When the mind says, "I need this to be happy," pause. Ask gently, is that true? When you feel the pull of craving for attention, for success, for certainty, take a breath. Shift from the story to the space that's aware of the story. That shift is enlightenment in miniature. You don't have to silence your thoughts. You only need to see them clearly. Awareness is not effort, it's presence. It's the quiet watching of your own inner world. The more you rest in awareness, the more your mind's noise loses its authority. The thoughts keep coming, but they pass through you like wind through trees. The branches sway, but the roots remain still. And slowly the restless monkey begins to sleep. In its place, clarity awakens. The mind creates need. Awareness destroys it. Because awareness reveals that there was never anything missing, only the illusion of lack. When you awaken to this truth, you stop running. You stop demanding life to be different. You begin to live from your center, calm, whole, and complete. The Buddha said, "In the seen there is only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the thought, only the thought." That is the simplicity of awareness. It doesn't cling. It doesn't resist. It simply witnesses.
The art of letting go. In every moment, life is asking us to let go, to release our grip on things, people, and expectations, to flow instead of fight. But the human mind clings. It holds tightly to what is familiar, even when it causes suffering. It says, "I can't lose this. I can't let this change." The Buddha taught that all suffering arises from clinging, holding on to what is passing, refusing to accept what is. Letting go, then, is not loss, it's liberation. It's the quiet art of surrendering to the impermanence of everything. When you let go, you stop fighting the river of existence. And in that surrender, life begins to flow again. Suffering begins when we forget the truth of impermanence. Everything that arises must pass. every joy, every pain, every moment, every breath. But the mind doesn't want to hear that. It builds stories around control. If I can just hold on, things will stay the same. If I can control this outcome, I'll be safe. And yet, the more we try to control life, the more life slips through our fingers. The Buddha compared this to grasping a handful of water. The tighter you squeeze, the less you hold. So we suffer, not because things end, but because we resist their ending. Not because people change, but because we want them not to. Letting go begins when we see that resistance is the true source of our pain. The mind's desire to control. The mind is like a river trying to freeze itself. It wants certainty in a world that is made of change. It wants permanence in a life that is impermanent. And so we cling to identities. This is who I am. We cling to relationships. They belong to me. We cling to outcomes. This must happen for me to be happy. But all of these are illusions. Even the self you cling to is not fixed. It changes, moment to moment, like a flame flickering in the wind. The Buddha said, "Just as a snake sheds its skin, we must shed our past again and again." When you let go of control, you're not giving up. You're giving in to the flow of life itself. You stop fighting reality, and in that acceptance, energy returns to you. The exhaustion fades. The stillness deepens.
Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop trying to own what was never yours. Life is not something to possess, it's something to participate in. When you loosen your grip, life moves through you like water finding its way downstream. The Buddha compared this to the lotus, rooted in mud, yet open to the sky, untouched by the waters below. The more you let go, the lighter you become. The lighter you become, the more naturally life flows through you. When you cling, you stagnate. When you release, you evolve. That is the paradox of freedom. You don't gain by holding. You gain by releasing. Letting go creates space, and in that space, new life begins to form. What looks like emptiness is actually a womb, a sacred pause where creation begins again. Surrender is not weakness. It's the highest form of trust. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." To live in peace, you must trust the unfolding of life, even when you don't understand it. Sometimes the things you lose are not punishments, they're protection. Sometimes the endings you mourn are quiet beginnings in disguise. When you stop clinging, you stop blocking the flow of blessings that are trying to reach you. It's like releasing a dam that was holding back a great river. Once it opens, everything begins to move again. This is what Buddhists call anicca, impermanence. To live in harmony with anicca is to stop resisting change and start dancing with it. You learn to trust the rhythm, even when you don't know where it leads.
So how do we live this teaching in everyday life? Start with awareness. Notice what you're holding on to, a memory, an identity, a resentment, a plan. Ask yourself, What would happen if I stopped fighting this? Not ignoring it, not denying it, simply loosening the grip. Breathe. Let the moment be as it is. Every time you allow life to unfold without interference, you strengthen your ability to flow. Letting go is not a one-time event. It's a lifelong rhythm. You'll do it again and again, with thoughts, with people, with seasons of your life. And each time, you'll feel a little more weight lift off your shoulders. You'll notice that rejection can become protection, that endings can become redirections, that what felt like loss was simply the clearing of space for something greater. The Buddha said, in the end, only 3 things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go. Letting go is the grace that allows love and gentleness to exist. It is the wisdom of the river that flows, never the same, yet always whole. So let life move through you. Let people come and go. Let moments rise and fall. And know that in every letting go, you are not losing anything real. You are making room for peace. Suffering is holding on. Freedom is release. The more you let go, the more life flows.
The power hidden in silence. In the noise of the modern world, silence is often misunderstood. We treat it like an absence, an empty space to be filled with sound, conversation, or distraction. But in the teachings of the Buddha, silence is not emptiness. It is presence, the quiet fullness of awareness itself. Silence is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of stillness. And from that stillness, wisdom arises. The Buddha often spoke of noble silence. It's the kind of silence that isn't forced, but chosen. A silence that nourishes the mind, steadies the heart, and connects you to something deeper than thought. In that silence, you begin to hear what cannot be heard with the ears, the quiet pulse of life itself, the restless mind, and the need for noise. The mind resists silence. It fills the air with thought, just as the world fills space with sound, because in silence the mind loses its stage. There is nothing to feed on, no story, no comparison, no noise to hide behind. This is why silence can feel uncomfortable at first. It confronts us with ourselves. When the world quiets down, we begin to hear our own inner restlessness, the monkey mind jumping from one branch of thought to another. But the Buddha taught that awareness transforms even this restlessness. When you stop fighting the noise of your own mind and simply observe it, the noise begins to settle. Like muddy water left undisturbed, the sediment falls to the bottom and the water becomes clear. That clarity, born from silence, is the beginning of spiritual power. Silence teaches without words. It doesn't lecture or argue. It reveals. When you sit quietly, no distractions, no phone, no music, something subtle begins to happen. You start to sense the undercurrent of life that is always here, beneath the surface of thought.
You begin to feel the energy of awareness itself, soft, steady, unchanging. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Silence is that one word spoken not by the mouth, but by being. In silence, you realize that understanding doesn't come from analysis, but from presence. You don't think your way to truth. You feel it in the stillness between thoughts. The more you listen, the more you hear what can't be spoken.
Spiritual power doesn't come from control or force. It comes from stillness. The one who can remain calm in chaos is the one who has learned the true art of strength. When silence fills your inner world, you stop reacting impulsively. You begin to respond with awareness. That pause, the sacred space between stimulus and response, is where your freedom lives. The Buddha called this sati, mindfulness, the power of presence. It's the ability to remain anchored while the waves of thought and emotion rise and fall. This is why silence is the foundation of wisdom. In silence, you can see clearly. In silence, you can feel the right action before it is taken. In silence, your intuition, that deep knowing, awakens. So how do we cultivate this silence in daily life? Begin by creating small spaces of stillness in your day. You don't need a cave or a monastery. You just need to pause. When you wake up, before you speak, breathe and feel the quiet of the morning. When you walk, walk without your phone. When you eat, eat without distraction. These moments are not wasted. They are sacred. They train the mind to rest in awareness. During meditation, the Buddha encouraged noble silence, not merely the absence of speech, but the presence of mindfulness. When you sit, don't chase thoughts and don't suppress them. Let them come and go like echoes fading into the horizon. The more you practice, the more your inner dialogue slows down. And in that stillness, peace reveals itself. Over time, silence becomes your natural state, a silent strength that doesn't need to prove itself, defend itself, or explain itself.
There's a saying in Zen, when the mouth is closed, the heart begins to speak. Silence doesn't mean disengagement. It means listening on a higher frequency. It allows you to sense truth before words distort it. You become aware not just of what people say, but of the energy behind their words. You hear not with your ears, but with your being. This kind of listening builds compassion. Because when you are silent inside, you can truly hear others, not through judgment, but through understanding. And that's the paradox of silence. The quieter you become, the louder your presence speaks. Your calmness becomes your communication. Your stillness becomes your influence. People feel peace in your presence, not because of what you say, but because of what you are. In Buddhism, silence is not emptiness, but the presence of awareness and energy. It acts as a powerful teacher, allowing you to hear the subtle truth inside you and sense things that can't be heard with the ears. Silence allows the muddy water of the mind to settle, bringing clarity, calmness, and wisdom through direct experience. It serves as the foundation of spiritual power because it enables you to observe rather than react. Through silence, you become anchored in awareness, unshakable amid noise, unmoved by chaos. The mind may still speak, the world may still shout, but deep within, you remain untouched. This is the heart of noble silence, to be so present, so aware that you no longer need to speak to express truth. You simply live it. By cultivating noble silence, you create a sacred pause between thought and action, allowing conscious choice rather than impulsivity. This inner stillness means you become anchored and unshakable, carrying a calm energy that speaks for you. The Buddha said, "Silence is an ocean. Words are but rivers." To dwell in silence is to dwell in the ocean of being, vast, still, and infinite.
The illusion of brokenness. From the moment we are born, the world begins to tell us that something is missing. We're taught to chase success, love, recognition, possessions, as if each one will fill a hidden void inside us. And so we spend our lives searching for completion, believing that somewhere, just beyond our reach, lies the missing piece that will make us whole. But the Buddha taught a different truth, one that turns this entire search upside down. You are not broken. You were never incomplete. Wholeness is not something you earn, find, or fix. It is what you already are. Healing, in the Buddhist sense, is not the mending of something damaged. It's the remembering of something perfect that was never lost. From childhood, we're conditioned to believe that worth must be proven. We hear, "Be better, do more, achieve this, become that." And somewhere along the way, we begin to equate being with earning. We start to believe that until we succeed, we are not enough. This conditioning creates an invisible wound, not because something broke within us, but because we forgot who we are. The mind begins to whisper, "You're not beautiful enough. You're not successful enough. You're not loved enough." These are not truths. They are illusions. Thoughts passing through awareness like clouds passing across the sun. And yet, when we believe them, we live in darkness. The Buddha called this ignorance, avidya, the forgetting of our true nature. It's not that we are broken. It's that we are blinded by clouds of self-judgment and comparison.
The mind's nature is to divide, to compare, to measure, to separate. It says, "This is good, that is bad. This part of me is acceptable, that part must be hidden." And in this endless comparison, suffering arises, because each judgment reinforces the illusion that you are incomplete. But awareness,
Pure awareness has no such divisions. It does not label or judge. It simply sees. The Buddha compared awareness to a mirror. The mirror reflects everything, yet is untouched by what it reflects. A storm may rage outside, but the mirror remains clear. Your true self is that mirror. Thoughts, emotions, and experiences come and go upon its surface, but they do not define it. When you identify with a passing emotion, I am abandoned, I am unworthy, I am broken, you mistake the reflection for the mirror itself. But when awareness awakens, you realize, I am not this pain. I am the space in which the pain arises. And in that moment of seeing, suffering begins to dissolve. Imagine the sun shining behind thick clouds. Even when the sky is gray, the sun is still there, radiant, steady, untouched. The clouds don't destroy the sun, they only obscure it. In the same way, your essence, your awareness has never been harmed. Trauma, heartbreak, loss, these are clouds. They pass. What remains is the ever-present light of consciousness that you truly are. The Buddha called this Buddha nature, the innate purity and wisdom within every being. No matter what has happened to you, no matter what mistakes you have made, this light has never dimmed. It cannot be broken because it was never made. The spiritual journey, then, is not a quest for perfection. It's the gentle act of remembering your wholeness, brushing away the clouds until you recognize the sun that was shining all along.
Seeing suffering as experience, not identity. When pain arises, the unawakened mind says, "This is happening to me." It personalizes everything. If someone leaves, the mind says, "I am abandoned." If a dream fails, I am a failure. If the body hurts, I am this pain. But awareness sees differently. It recognizes that these are experiences, not identities. They come and go, like waves upon the surface of the ocean, but the ocean itself, vast, still, and deep, remains untouched. When you rest in awareness, pain can be felt fully without becoming who you are. You experience sorrow, but you no longer become sorrow. You experience loss, but you no longer become lost. This is the profound shift Buddhism points to, from identification to observation, from contraction to spaciousness. And in that spaciousness, healing happens naturally. Because healing was never about fixing yourself. It was about remembering that nothing was ever broken. There is a beautiful Zen saying, "The cracks you think ruined you are actually where the light enters." We spend so much of our lives hiding our cracks, the flaws, the failures, the wounds, thinking they make us less. But in truth, those very cracks are what open us to compassion, wisdom, and depth. They make us human, tender, open, real. The Buddha's enlightenment came not from escaping suffering, but from understanding it. He sat under the Bodhi tree and looked deeply into pain, his own and the world's, until he saw through it. He realized that suffering, when understood, is the doorway to liberation. The world conditions you to believe you are incomplete and need to chase external factors like people, possessions, achievements to feel whole. The profound Buddhist truth is that you were never broken. Healing is remembering your existing state of pure awareness. Wholeness is not something you reach at the end of your journey. It is the ground you've been walking on the whole time. The feeling of incompleteness is an illusion created by the mind's constant comparison and judgment. When you awaken to this truth, you stop chasing and start resting. You stop fixing and start being. You stop identifying with pain and start observing it with love. The Buddha said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." When you truly see that, you realize the love you seek outside has always been your own reflection. Suffering arises when you identify with temporary pain instead of seeing it as an experience you are having. The realization of wholeness means seeing that the cracks you think ruined you are actually where the light enters.
The sacred solitude. Real life doesn't begin in the noise of the world. It begins in the stillness of your own heart. The Buddha taught that solitude is not an escape from life, but an entry into its deepest truth. It's in the quiet company of yourself that you begin to see things clearly, who you are, what you carry, and what is real. But solitude frightens the ego. The moment the noise fades, the mind begins to panic. Without an audience to perform for, the identity you've built starts to tremble. This is why most people run from being alone, not because solitude hurts, but because it reveals. Yet the path to awakening begins right there, in the silence, in the stillness, in the place where you finally stop running from yourself. We often confuse loneliness with aloneness. Loneliness cries, "I am empty without others." Aloneness whispers, "I am whole within myself." Loneliness is the absence of something external. Aloneness is the presence of something eternal. The difference lies in where you look, outside or inside. The Buddha spent years wandering forests and mountains in solitude. He wasn't escaping humanity. He was returning to reality. He discovered that the truest companionship comes from awareness itself, the silent witness within you that never leaves, never judges, and never needs to be entertained. When you begin to sense that presence, loneliness dissolves. You realize that even when no one is around you, you are never truly alone. The ego's fear of solitude. The ego thrives on attention, comparison, and reaction. It feeds on noise, the chatter of others, the distractions of the world. When you sit in solitude, the ego begins to starve. There's no audience to admire it, no conflict to strengthen it. So it resists. It whispers, "You need company, you need validation, you need more." But what the ego fears, the soul craves.
because only in silence can you hear the deeper truth of your being. Only when the performance stops can life itself speak through you. The Buddha compared this process to clearing a forest path. At first, the overgrowth seems impossible to move through, but step by step, as you keep walking, the way becomes clear. Solitude is that clearing, a space where illusions fall away and what's real begins to appear.
When you learn to be alone without fear, something profound happens. You begin to draw strength from stillness. Like great trees that grow deep roots in isolation, solitude gives you stability. It teaches you to depend not on approval, but on truth, not on company, but on clarity. In the silence of solitude, the muddy waters of the mind settle, and wisdom begins to shine through. Buddhism calls this noble solitude, not the loneliness of withdrawal, but the serenity of self-knowledge. You stop needing constant stimulation because you have found richness within. You stop fearing the quiet because you recognize it as the sound of your own awareness. Solitude becomes a mirror. It reflects both your illusions and your infinite nature. It humbles the ego, but empowers the soul. When you generate peace from within, rather than depending on others to provide it, you reclaim your power. You stop negotiating your worth through relationships or success. You begin to move through life with a calm steadiness that no one can give or take away. The Buddha said, "The one who is tranquil, who has entered solitude, who is content, that one is like a deep, still lake." In solitude, you discover that peace is not something you achieve, it's something you uncover. It was always there, waiting beneath the layers of distraction and desire. And when you find it, life begins to move differently. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop grasping and start flowing. The world doesn't lose its color. It becomes more vivid because now you see it without distortion.
The mastery of solitude. To master solitude is to master life. Because solitude, when understood deeply, is not isolation, it is liberation. It is the art of being content without conditions. The Buddha taught that the one who is at peace in solitude is invincible. Why? Because their happiness no longer depends on outcomes. Their calm is not borrowed from the world, it is born within. Solitude is a sacred presence. It's where you learn to be enough for yourself, where the constant craving for attention, validation, and understanding begins to dissolve. And in that dissolution, you touch something rare, unshakable peace. In solitude, everything you've been avoiding begins to surface. The attachments, the fears, the regrets, all rise like silt in water. At first, it feels uncomfortable, even painful. The ego resists because it cannot perform when there is no one to watch. But this discomfort is purification. It is the fire that burns away illusion. You begin to see the many ways you've been clinging to people, to ideas, to the need to be someone. And slowly, With awareness, those attachments begin to fall away. This is why solitude is the great teacher. It does not flatter you, it reveals you. It shows you what is false so that what is true may remain. The Buddha often withdrew into solitude, not as an escape, but as a return to clarity, to truth, to the source of all peace. There is a difference between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness says, I am empty without others. Aloneness says, I am whole within myself. Loneliness is a hunger. Aloneness is a feast. It's not the absence of people, but the presence of yourself.
When you master solitude, you discover that the emptiness you feared was never empty at all. It was spacious, full of potential, full of life, full of peace. Buddhism calls this the Shunyata, the great emptiness that is not void, but pure presence. It is the space in which everything arises, including love, wisdom, and joy. When you stop running from solitude, you begin to see that you are not lacking anything. You are the completeness you've been seeking all along. Releasing the need for validation. As long as you depend on others for validation, your peace will remain fragile. The world's approval is like a shifting tide. It comes and goes, never still for long. But the peace that comes from self-understanding is immovable. In solitude, you realize that you do not need to be understood to be whole. You do not need to be seen to exist. You no longer seek to impress because you have found something greater than attention: authenticity. When you know yourself deeply, the opinions of others lose their weight. Their praise no longer lifts you too high, and their criticism no longer drags you too low. You stand steady, grounded in your own being. This is what the Buddha meant by true independence, not the absence of people, but freedom from dependence on them. The mind believes that strength is about action, but the Buddha taught that real strength comes from stillness. When you can sit quietly and remain at peace no matter what arises, you are mastering the art of life itself.
This is why solitude is so powerful. It builds inner endurance. Like trees that grow deeper roots in the stillness of the forest, solitude anchors you. It teaches you how to remain calm in chaos, patient in uncertainty, and kind in the face of impermanence. Through solitude, you stop clinging to things that are temporary. You no longer need the world to confirm your worth. Your peace becomes unconditional, untied from outcomes, untouched by change. And when peace no longer depends on what happens, you have discovered true freedom. From solitude to unconditional love. When you master being alone, your relationships transform, because you no longer enter them from emptiness, but from fullness. You no longer seek others to fill you. You meet them to share yourself.
This is the secret of unconditional love. It is love without need, without fear, without demand. It is love born from wholeness. The Buddha said, "Love yourself and watch, today, tomorrow, and always." When you love yourself through awareness, you stop grasping for love outside. You become love itself, a quiet radiance that asks for nothing yet gives everything. When you move through the world with this fullness, you carry a serenity that others can feel. You become a living reminder that peace is possible, and your solitude, once misunderstood, becomes your greatest gift to the world. To master life is not to control it, but to flow with it. And you can only flow when you are no longer clinging. Solitude teaches this flow. It shows you that the only true stability lies within. Mastery of solitude means cherishing it as a sacred presence and achieving contentment without conditions. Solitude is purifying. The initial discomfort forces you to face ignored attachments, insecurities, and regrets so you can release them. When you can sit in silence and feel complete, when your peace no longer wavers with the world, when your love no longer depends on who stays or leaves, you have mastered being alone. And when you master being alone, you have mastered life itself.
The turning point. Every spiritual journey begins with a subtle moment, the moment when the outer world loses its power to satisfy you. The pleasures that once brought excitement begin to feel empty. The achievements that once defined you start to feel hollow, and a quiet voice inside begins to whisper, "There must be more than this." That whisper marks the beginning of the inward journey, the path of awakening, the return home to yourself. The Buddha called this turning point dukkha, the recognition of suffering, not the suffering of pain alone, but the suffering of endless dissatisfaction, the sense that no matter what you achieve, peace remains one step away. It is in this moment of honesty that the real journey begins, not outward, but inward. For much of our lives, we are taught to look outward for meaning. We chase relationships, possessions, recognition, experiences, believing that if we collect enough of them, we'll finally feel complete. But the outer chase is the ego's playground. The ego survives by comparison, by craving, by saying, "Once I get this, then I'll be happy." And even when you get it, it whispers again, "Now you need more." The Buddha called this the wheel of craving, a cycle that spins endlessly, trapping us in dissatisfaction. You can spend a lifetime running in that circle until one day exhaustion itself becomes your teacher. It's when you realize that nothing outside you can fill what's missing inside you that the path inward finally opens. The inward journey begins when you realize you are not your thoughts, your fears, or your story. You are the awareness that sees them. For most of our lives, we are lost in the movie of the mind, believing we are the characters on screen.
but awakening happens the moment you step back and realize you are the one watching the film. This awareness is pure, silent, and unchanging. It observes the mind's endless noise, the judgments, the regrets, the anxieties, without becoming entangled in them. When you rest in this awareness, you begin to see clearly. Most suffering is self-created, born from resistance to life, from attachment to false identities, from the refusal to let things be as they are.
Sitting with the wounds. Healing happens when you stop running from what hurts, when you sit quietly with your wounds, not as a victim, but as a witness. Every heartbreak, every disappointment, every loss contains a seed of wisdom, a lesson that life has been trying to teach you all along. In Buddhism, suffering is not seen as punishment, but as a teacher, a mirror showing you where you're still clinging, where you're still asleep, where you still believe something outside of you can complete you. When you meet your pain with awareness instead of resistance, it begins to soften. It transforms from poison into medicine, from burden into understanding. The heart, once hardened by fear, begins to open again. And you realize healing was never about erasing the past. It was about allowing the past to reveal your strength. The greatest suffering is not in the world. It's the war we wage within ourselves. The endless argument between who we are and who we think we should be, between our desires and our reality, between control and surrender. This inner war drains our energy, our peace, our joy. But the Buddha's path is the path of peace, and peace begins when you stop fighting with life. When you trust that everything has its place, that even pain has purpose, that even endings have meaning. You stop struggling and begin flowing. The mind says, I need to understand. Awareness says, I need only to be. When you surrender to being, when you let go of the constant need to control, you discover a freedom far greater than happiness, the freedom of acceptance. This is where real life begins, not when everything outside is perfect, but when the war inside you ends. As awareness deepens, life begins to look different. The same world remains, but you are no longer lost in it. You begin to see beauty in simplicity. Silence feels alive. Stillness feels full. You stop chasing and start receiving. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop fearing change because you've discovered the unchanging within you. The Buddha said, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. This peace is not a reward. It is your natural state, revealed when illusion falls away. It doesn't depend on what happens. It radiates from what is. It is not something you achieve. It is something you remember. When you rest in that remembrance, you awaken, not to a new world, but to the one that has always been here, seen now through clear eyes and a quiet heart. The freedom of surrender. The journey within is not about becoming something new. It's about remembering who you are beneath the noise. It's about letting awareness replace identification, understanding replace resistance, and surrender replace control. When you can look at life, its joys and its sorrows, and say with a calm heart, "This too is part of the path. You are awake." The Buddha once said, "There is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path." And that path begins not somewhere far away, but right here, in the stillness of your own being. So close your eyes, breathe deeply, let the noise settle. Because when you journey within, you don't escape life, you finally awaken to it. This journey starts when the outer world loses its power to satisfy, prompting a return to the self. The constant external chase is driven by the ego, which leads to dukkha, endless dissatisfaction. The inward journey begins when you realize you are the awareness watching the mind, not the mind itself. This awakening reveals that much suffering is self-created through resistance to life and attachment to false identities. Healing occurs when you sit with your wounds, viewing every heartbreak and failure as a teacher, allowing the pain to soften you and transform into wisdom. The moment the war inside you ends and you trust life, you find the greatest freedom of all.
The paradox of solitude. At first glance, solitude and connection seem like opposites. To be alone appears to mean separation, and to be connected seems to require others. But in the teachings of the Buddha, this is only an illusion. Solitude and connection are not enemies, they are reflections of the same truth. When you transcend the illusion of dependency, you discover the sacred balance, the realization that being alone does not mean being apart, and that your deepest connection is not with people, but with existence itself. This is the paradox that the awakened ones understood. The more deeply you rest in yourself, the more you feel united with all that is. The illusion of separation. The ego lives on the idea of being a separate I. It says, "This is me and that is the world." But this division exists only in thought, not in truth. Buddhism calls this illusion avidya, ignorance, or the forgetting of unity. The mind identifies with the body, with name and form, and in doing so creates the illusion of being cut off from life. Yet in moments of stillness, in meditation, in awe, in love, this illusion fades. The boundaries soften, the inner chatter quiets, and something vast begins to awaken. You realize you are not just a person standing on the earth, you are the earth. You are not merely breathing the air is breathing you. Like a wave on the ocean, you are both distinct and inseparable from the whole. The wave rises and falls, but it never leaves the ocean.
When inner noise fades, awareness expands. You begin to sense that everything, trees, rivers, people, stars, is part of a single unfolding presence. In meditation, this becomes more than a thought. It becomes a direct experience,
The breath, once felt as mine, becomes the rhythm of the universe itself. You feel not as a fragment of life, but as life expressing itself through this temporary form. This is what Thich Nhat Hanh called interbeing, the truth that nothing exists by itself. The flower is made of sunlight, rain, soil, and time. You too are made of everything: parents, ancestors, stars, consciousness itself. When the illusion of me dissolves, you don't disappear, you expand. When all fragile identities fall away, the roles, the labels, the memories, what remains is pure being. It is unshakable, boundless, eternal. The Buddha called this tathata, suchness, the direct experience of reality without distortion. In this state, there is no separation between you and the world, between the observer and the observed. You are not in the universe, you are the universe, aware of itself. To touch this state is to be free from fear, because what can you lose when you realize that everything is already part of you? Death loses its sting, because you see that what you are cannot die. The body changes, the form dissolves, but the awareness, the ocean beneath the wave, remains.
When you awaken to unity, love transforms. It is no longer a transaction, no longer a fragile emotion tied to attachment or need. It becomes a natural expression of being, like sunlight that cannot help but shine. You love others not because they complete you, but because they are you, appearing in a different form. This is why the Buddha taught metta, loving kindness, as the foundation of spiritual life. Because when you see the world through awakened eyes, every being becomes part of your own heart. You no longer fear loss, because nothing can truly be lost. You no longer cling to love, because you have become its source. This is the sacred balance: independence without isolation, love without attachment, solitude without separation. To live in this awareness is to walk through life lightly. You still play your roles: friend, parent, partner, but you no longer mistake them for your essence. You move through the world like the wind, touching everything, grasping nothing. You give freely, because you know nothing is ever truly yours or truly lost. You love deeply, because you see yourself in all beings. You act with compassion, because you know the suffering of one is the suffering of all. The Buddha said, "As a mother protects her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings." Boundless, not limited by self, not bound by fear, that is the life of awakening. When you live from this truth, you are alone, yet connected to everything, still, yet alive in every heartbeat of the cosmos. The sacred balance of solitude and connection is the highest realization. It resolves the great paradox of existence, that you are both nothing and everything, both the drop and the ocean. When the small self dissolves into the vastness of being, you do not vanish, you awaken. When the illusion of dependency fades, the truth of interbeing, or unity, is revealed. You realize you are not a separate I, but belong to existence itself, like a wave inseparable from the ocean.
This profound connection is experienced when inner noise fades and the boundaries between self and world dissolve. When all fragile external identities fall away, what remains is pure being, unshakable, boundless, eternal. This sacred balance means you move through life with independence, loving others without fear of loss, because you are already the source of love. You walk through life at peace, loving fully, living freely, and resting in the deep knowing that there is no other to fear or lose.
The end of seeking. The Buddha once said, "There is no path to peace. Peace is the path." Most of us spend our lives searching for happiness, for meaning, for some final answer. We chase it in people, in possessions, in spiritual goals, even in meditation itself. But seeking never ends, because the seeker itself is the problem. The moment you stop searching for peace and begin resting in this moment, you discover it. It was here all along. The end of seeking is the beginning of peace. That is the art of inner stillness. Stillness is not something you create. It's not a state you reach through effort or discipline. Stillness is what remains when effort ceases. It is the natural clarity of your being, uncovered when the storm of thought settles. The Buddha compared the mind to a glass of muddy water. If you leave it undisturbed, the mud slowly sinks to the bottom, and the water becomes clear. In the same way, when you stop stirring the mind with endless thought, the clarity of awareness reveals itself. You realize that peace was never missing. It was simply hidden beneath agitation. Stillness is not the absence of life. It is life without resistance. It's the quiet heartbeat of the present moment, the space in which everything arises and passes away.
Resistance, the source of suffering. Suffering is born not from experience itself, but from our resistance to experience. The Buddha called this dukkha, dissatisfaction, the restless state of wanting life to be different than it is. The mind says, "This should not be happening." And in that simple sentence, suffering begins. But stillness has no argument with life. It doesn't divide moments into good or bad, pleasant or painful. It simply allows. And in that allowing, there is freedom. When you stop resisting life, you begin to flow with it. When you stop trying to control what comes and goes, you become anchored in the calm beneath all change. That is true peace, not the absence of chaos, but the absence of inner resistance to it. In Buddhist practice, this seeing is called vipassana, insight. It's not about controlling the mind, but observing it. When you watch thoughts arise and pass away without clinging to them, you begin to see their impermanence. A thought appears, "I am not enough." You notice it. You don't fight it. You don't believe it. You just watch. And in that simple watching, the thought dissolves, because what is seen clearly loses its power to deceive. Vipassana reveals a profound truth. You are not your thoughts, emotions, or stories. You are the still awareness that witnesses them. And when you rest in that awareness, seeking stops, because there is nothing left to seek. You are already what you were looking for.
Stillness lives only here, in the now. The past and future exist only in thought, and thought is never still. The Buddha taught sati, mindfulness, the art of anchoring awareness in the present moment. Because suffering exists only in time. Regret lives in the past. Fear lives in the future. But in the now, this breath, this silence, there is no problem. There is only being. When you anchor yourself in the present, the noise of the mind fades, and what remains is a vast, unshakable calm. You stop trying to escape this moment and finally begin to live in it. When you are still, you stop demanding life to fill you. You stop looking for happiness in circumstances. Instead, you realize that fullness was never something to be gained. It was your natural state. The Buddha described this as santuti, contentment. It's not a passive satisfaction, but a vibrant aliveness that comes from no longer needing anything to complete you. In this state, you may lose possessions, people, opportunities, but you do not lose peace. Because peace is not something you own, it's what you are. When you live from this inner stillness, you become like a deep lake. The surface may ripple with wind and rain, but the depths remain unmoved.
You begin to act from clarity, not compulsion. Love flows naturally, not from need, but from abundance. And life, once a constant chase, becomes a graceful dance. When the mind stops searching, being begins. You are no longer chasing truth. You are living it. You are no longer trying to find peace. You are peace. Stillness does not mean withdrawal from life. It means engagement without attachment. It means seeing clearly, acting wisely, and resting deeply in the awareness that nothing is missing. So sit quietly. Breathe. Let the waves of thought settle. Because when the seeking ends, the silence within begins to speak. And in that silence, you discover what the Buddha discovered, that there is nowhere to go, nothing to become, and nothing to find, because you are already home. The call to return. There comes a moment in every life when the outer world begins to lose its shine. The things you once chased, success, affection, recognition, no longer hold the same power. They fade like echoes in a vast space. This is not loss. It's a calling, a quiet invitation from the soul asking you to return home. Buddhism calls this the beginning of awakening, when you finally realize that no amount of external striving can give you what already exists within you. It's here, in the silence of solitude that the quiet rebirth begins. Solitude is the sacred space where everything false begins to fall away. It is not punishment, it is purification. When you are alone, there is no one to perform for, no role to hide behind, no mask to wear. At first, this feels uncomfortable. The mind grows restless, grasping for distraction, afraid of what it might find in the silence. But this is the very doorway to transformation, because what feels like emptiness at first is simply the absence of noise, and beneath that absence lies truth. As the false self dissolves, the one built from opinions, expectations, and fears, the real self begins to emerge, not a new identity, but the timeless awareness that has been there all along.
The alchemy of surrender. Transformation doesn't happen through effort. It happens through surrender. The Buddha said, "Let go and you will find freedom." In solitude, surrender means allowing life to unfold without trying to control it. It means sitting through the discomfort, watching the chaos of thought until it softens on its own. When you stop fighting your inner storms, they begin to calm. And in that calm, something miraculous happens. You begin to hear your own truth. It doesn't speak loudly, it whispers, and you recognize it not through words, but through a deep sense of knowing. This is the birth of wisdom, not learned, but revealed.
In Buddhist symbolism, the lotus is the flower of enlightenment. But it doesn't grow in clear water. It rises from the mud, from darkness, decay, and stillness. Your consciousness is no different. The mud, your pain, your losses, your confusion, is not an obstacle to awakening. It is the very ground of it. When you sit in solitude and face your suffering without judgment, you are like the lotus pushing upward through the darkness. Slowly you begin to bloom, not despite the mud, but because of it. The Buddha taught that suffering, when understood, is no longer suffering. It becomes the teacher that opens your heart and frees your spirit. Through this quiet process, your pain is not erased. It is transformed into clarity and compassion.
The birth of true awareness. As the mind settles, something extraordinary begins to reveal itself. The awareness that watches everything. It does not judge. It does not cling. It simply observes. You begin to realize, I am not my thoughts. I am not my fear. I am the one who sees them. This awareness is the true self, unchanging, timeless, free. It has no beginning and no end. It was there before the noise, and it remains after the silence. The Buddha called this state nibbana, the extinguishing of illusion. Not a void, but a profound fullness. A peace that comes from no longer identifying with the temporary. In this awareness, you are reborn, not as someone new, but as what you have always been. The quiet rebirth doesn't end in solitude. It begins there. When you emerge from stillness, you no longer move through life from need or fear. You act from presence, speak from authenticity, and love without attachment. The world may look the same, but you
are no longer the same within it. You walk through chaos, yet remain unshaken. You experience loss, yet remain whole. Because your identity no longer depends on what changes.
Like the lotus, you now bloom in both the light and the mud, untouched, radiant, alive. The Buddha said, "As a solid rock is not shaken by the wind, so the wise are not moved by praise or blame." That is the fruit of solitude, a peace so steady that even the storms of life cannot uproot it. The quiet rebirth is not about becoming something new. It is the gentle awakening to what was always there, the boundless awareness behind all experience. When the false self fades, the true self shines. When striving stops, being begins. And in that being, you discover the unshakable peace of your own presence. So when life grows noisy, return to your solitude. Sit quietly, breathe deeply, let the mud settle and the lotus bloom. Because in the end, solitude is not the absence of life. It is where life is finally understood. And through that understanding, you are quietly reborn.
The Shunyata. Between every two thoughts, there is a space. Tiny, silent, invisible. Most people never notice it, because the mind rushes so quickly from one thought to the next, never pausing long enough to see what lies between. But that space, that pause, is the most sacred thing in existence. Buddhism calls it Shunyata, or emptiness. Yet it is not nothing. It is everything. Infinite potential, pure awareness, the stillness from which all life arises and to which all things return. When you discover this space, you discover the infinite within yourself. The mind is like a restless sky, filled with clouds of thought, worry, judgment, memory, desire. Each thought shouts for attention. This is important. This is who you are. This must be solved. But the Buddha taught that this constant movement is what blinds us to truth. Because when the sky is full of clouds, you cannot see the vastness behind them. Suffering happens not because thoughts exist, but because we mistake them for reality. We believe every story the mind tells, and in doing so, we forget the silence beneath it. That silence is the real you, the awareness that watches the thoughts come and go without being touched by them. The space between thoughts. When you meditate, you begin to notice that thoughts are not continuous. Between one thought and the next, there is a tiny gap, a moment of pure awareness before the next wave arises. At first, this gap feels microscopic, fleeting, like the blink of an eye. But as your practice deepens, that gap begins to expand. You start resting in it, noticing the peace that lives there.
This is where meditation transforms from effort to surrender. You stop trying to silence the mind, and instead you begin to listen to the silence that was always there between its words. This silence is not empty in the usual sense. It is full of being, full of potential, full of life. It is the womb of existence itself. Imagine the sky on a stormy day. Thunder rolls, rain falls, lightning flashes. If you look only at the weather, you might think the sky itself is angry or broken. But the sky is never harmed by what passes through it. It remains vast, open, untouched. In the same way, your awareness is the sky. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, they are the weather. They come, they go. But you, the awareness, remain unchanged. Meditation is simply remembering that you are the sky, not the storm. When you rest as the sky, the weather no longer controls you. Sadness, fear, anger, they can pass through you without defining you. And what remains is peace, the peace that was never lost, only forgotten beneath the noise.
The word Shunyata often confuses people. They hear emptiness and think it means nothingness, but the Buddha meant something far deeper. Emptiness is not the absence of life. It is the absence of separateness. It is the realization that everything is interconnected, interdependent, without fixed essence. A wave is empty of separate existence because it cannot exist apart from the ocean. You too are empty, not as a void, but as openness, inseparable from the universe itself. In that emptiness lies infinite potential. It is the silence that gives birth to all sound, the stillness from which every movement flows. When you touch this Shunyata, you awaken to the truth. You were never just a single thought or form. You are the vast, timeless field in which all experience unfolds. The path to nirvana. Meditation is the art of expanding that space, not by force, but by awareness. Each time you rest in the gap between thoughts, the illusion of separation weakens. The craving to fix, to control, to become begins to dissolve. The Buddha called this liberation, nirvana, the extinguishing of craving, the cooling of the inner fire.
When you abide in awareness itself, the mind grows still. You no longer chase happiness or run from pain. You simply are. And in that being, you discover the infinite. You realize that the peace you sought was never beyond reach. It was the very ground of your existence. The space between thoughts is not far away. It's here, right now, between this sentence and the next. Can you feel it? That subtle pause, that open silence? That is your true nature, limitless, still, alive. When you begin to live from that awareness, the world changes. You move through life without being entangled in it. You love without attachment, act without fear, and rest without effort. So sit quietly. Let your thoughts come and go like clouds in the sky. Don't chase them, don't fight them. Simply rest in the space between. Because in that space you are no longer the seeker. You are what was being sought. You are the silence before creation, the infinite within.
The fragility of ordinary peace. Most people mistake calmness for peace. They think peace means comfort, when things go their way, when life is predictable, when the world agrees with them.
But that peace is fragile. It breaks the moment someone disagrees, the moment change arrives, the moment life reminds us that nothing stays the same. The Buddha taught that true peace, unshakable peace, cannot depend on conditions. It arises when you stop resisting what is, when you stop identifying with the passing, and rest instead in the eternal awareness that contains it all. This is the discovery of the unshakable self, the peace that nothing can take away. Ordinary peace is built on conditions. If I am loved, I'll be happy. If I'm successful, I'll be calm. If nothing goes wrong, I'll be at peace. But the world never stops changing. Even the happiest moments fade. Even the people you love must one day leave or change. And when peace depends on impermanent things, peace itself becomes impermanent. This is why the Buddha called such peace worldly. It's like building a home on shifting sand. It feels safe for a while, until the waves arrive. True peace, the Buddha said, comes only from seeing that everything that arises will pass. And when you stop clinging to what passes, you discover what does not. Imagine the ocean. On its surface, waves rise and fall, some gentle, some violent, each one appearing for a moment before dissolving back into the sea. If you identify only with the wave, every rise feels like triumph, every fall feels like failure. But if you remember you are the ocean, deep, vast, unchanging, then every wave becomes a part of you, yet none can disturb your depth. Your thoughts, emotions, and moods are waves. Anger, joy, sadness, excitement, they all come and go. But beneath them there is something untouched, the awareness that sees them all. This awareness is the unshakable self, the one that feels but does not cling, that observes but does not drown.
The difference between suffering and peace lies in a single shift from identification to observation. When anger arises and you say, "I am angry," you fuse with it. You become the storm. But when you say, "Anger is passing through me," you create space. You remain the sky, watching the weather move through you. This simple change in language reveals a profound truth. Emotions are not you. They are experiences happening in you. The Buddha called this wisdom upekkha, equanimity. It is not cold detachment, but perfect balance, the ability to feel everything without being enslaved by anything. When you live from this awareness, pain can touch you, but not consume you. Loss can move through you, but not define you. The self that observes remains free. The deathless state. The Buddha often spoke of the deathless, not as a place, but as a state of consciousness. It is the awareness that cannot be destroyed, because it was never born. Everything you can point to, the body, the personality, the story of me, is temporary. But the one who is aware of all this was there before thought began and remains after every thought fades. That awareness, your true self, is untouched by gain or loss, pleasure or pain, birth, or death. When you know yourself as that awareness, you stop searching for peace because you realize you are peace. The world may still move around you, but within there is stillness. Like the eye of a storm, you remain untouched no matter how fiercely life spins. To live from this peace is not to withdraw from life. It is to live deeply within it, but without fear. You still love, but you no longer cling. You still care, but you no longer control. You still act, but your actions come from clarity, not craving. When joy arises, you enjoy it. When pain arrives, you allow it. When change comes, you bow to it. Because you have discovered that nothing real can be lost. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." When you live by this truth, the world no longer has the power to shake you. You become like a mountain, weathered by time but unmoved by storms, rooted not in what changes, but in what is eternal. Unshakable peace is not the absence of emotion or challenge. It is the presence of awareness in the midst of them. It's the knowing that even as the body ages, even as identities shift, even as the world turns, the awareness within you remains untouched. So when life changes, as it always will, remember, you are not the wave, you are the ocean. You are not the noise, you are the silence that holds it. You are not what comes and goes, you are what remains. That is the unshakable self, the peace that nothing and no one can take away.
If your heart feels lighter, it's because you've remembered the truth. You were never broken, and nothing outside you was ever meant to complete you. You've seen that loneliness is not a void, but an invitation into yourself. That solitude is not isolation, but the temple where illusion fades and truth awakens. When you stop running, the noise settles. When you stop seeking, peace begins to speak. And what it tells you is simple. You are not the storm, you are the sky that holds it. You are not the wave, you are the ocean that holds it. Real freedom isn't found by fixing yourself. It's found in realizing there was never anything wrong. You are the awareness that watches life rise and fall, untouched, eternal, infinite. So as this journey closes, remember what it has been pointing to all along. You are not a fragment of the universe. You are the universe remembering itself. Be gentle with the world. Breathe with the moment. And when you sit in silence, know that what you feel is not emptiness. It's the presence of your own being. You don't need to find peace. You only need to stop forgetting that you already are it.